There comes a moment in every life when the world grows loud, yet the heart grows quiet, when the rooms you once felt alive in suddenly feel foreign, and the people you once understood begin to feel distant shadows. If you've been wondering, why don't I feel connected to anyone anymore? This may not be a tragedy. It may be the beginning of your awakening. The quiet shift that happens inside before the world notices is often the most misunderstood, most unsettling, and yet most transformative stage of a person's inner evolution. It is the moment when something deep within you begins to rearrange itself, softly, silently, without explosions or declarations. Yet the very structure of your emotional world starts to change. You may not be able to point to a specific day or event that triggered it, because this kind of shift rarely announces its arrival. It settles in gently, like dust on windowsills, until one day you look at your life and realize the landscape feels strangely unfamiliar. What once felt warm now feels lukewarm. What once thrilled you now barely stirs your spirit. You begin to sense that you are no longer fully present in the spaces that once held you, and that recognition alone carries a weight you cannot easily put into words. This quiet shift often begins with a subtle discomfort, a restlessness that hums beneath your daily routines. You might find yourself losing interest in conversations that used to energize you, or feeling emotionally exhausted after interactions that once felt light. The people around you may not notice anything at all. You smile at the right moments, respond politely, maintain the flow of life. But inside, something is stirring. It is the earliest sign that the world you built from old needs, old wounds, and old expectations no longer fits the person you are becoming. You start questioning things you once accepted without hesitation. You begin to feel a tug toward depth, authenticity, and peace, even though you may not yet know how to find them. And because the shift is internal, invisible to anyone but you, it can feel like you are walking through life carrying a secret that even you don't fully understand. During this time, your senses sharpen to things you previously overlooked. You notice the heaviness in certain conversations. You sense the imbalance in relationships where you give more than you receive. You catch yourself pretending to be interested, pretending to be unbothered, pretending to fit in. And each act of pretending takes a toll, stretching the distance between who you were and who you are becoming. This is the silent work of transformation. It shows you the cracks long before anyone else sees them. You begin to realize that it is not the world that has changed suddenly, but your eyes that have widened. You are awakening, not drifting. You are seeing with new clarity, not withdrawing without cause. The quiet shift also brings an unexpected tenderness. You may find yourself craving solitude, not because you dislike people, but because you need space to listen to your own voice again. The noise of the world, once tolerable, begins to feel overwhelming. You may feel fragile and strong at the same time, drawn inward not out of fear but out of necessity. This craving for quiet is often the first step toward inner alignment. It is where you begin sorting through the emotional clutter that has collected over years of being everything for everyone except yourself. And although no one else may recognize the journey you are on, you feel it deeply. You sense the turning of a page within your own story. What makes this shift so profound is that it forces you to examine your connections through a new lens. You begin asking yourself whether you truly feel seen, valued, and understood by the people around you. You start acknowledging the relationships that drain you and the ones that nourish you. And most importantly, you begin recognizing the places where you were holding on out of habit rather than genuine belonging. This quiet inner movement is not about pushing others away. It is about learning to honor your emotional truth even when it disrupts the patterns of your past. It is the beginning of choosing authenticity over approval, fulfillment over obligation, and inner harmony over outer performance. This shift is not loud, yet it is powerful. It is not visible, yet it changes everything. It is the private moment your soul decides it is ready for a new chapter, even while the world still believes you're living in the old one. Losing connection is often mistaken for losing value, losing direction, or losing your place in the world. But in truth, it is one of the clearest signs that your inner landscape is evolving beyond what your external life can yet reflect. When you no longer feel drawn to the people, conversations, or environments that once held your attention, it does not mean something has broken within you. It means something has awakened. The emotional detachment you feel is not a collapse, but a reorganization of your spirit. It is your intuition quietly guiding you away from what no longer nourishes your growth. Many people interpret this shift as sadness, isolation, or a failing in their social life, but the true nature of this disconnect is far more sacred. It is the slow release of old identities, old beliefs, and old emotional patterns that you no longer align with. You are not losing connection. You are shedding the versions of yourself that once needed those connections. As you evolve internally, your heart begins to recognize the spaces where you have settled, compromised, or shrunk yourself just to remain included. You start to feel an inner resistance toward relationships that were built on convenience rather than truth. What once passed unnoticed now feels heavy. The conversations that revolve around complaints, conflict, or gossip begin to drain you rather than entertain you. The emotional labor you used to offer so freely begins to feel like a burden you are no longer willing to carry. And as this internal shift deepens, you realize that your spirit is no longer willing to stand in places where your presence is not valued. You may feel guilty for pulling away, confused by your sudden lack of interest, or unsure of who you are becoming. But this discomfort is simply the stretching of your inner boundaries to accommodate the growth taking place within you. This evolution often happens silently. Your inner world changes far before your outer world reflects it. You may continue showing up, engaging in familiar routines, and maintaining relationships out of habit, yet everything feels slightly out of tune. Your laughter feels lighter, your patience thinner, your tolerance shorter. You feel yourself drifting, not because you want to leave others behind, but because you can no longer dim your light to match the spaces around you. Your spirit begins to crave conversations with depth, relationships with reciprocity, and environments where you can breathe freely without performing or proving yourself. And suddenly, the disconnect you once feared begins to reveal itself as clarity. You see who you are becoming, and in that vision, you recognize that not everyone can walk with you into the next phase of your growth. This process is not about arrogance or superiority. It is not about judging others or elevating yourself. It is simply the natural consequence of inner transformation. When your mind expands, the boxes you once lived in feel suffocating. When your heart heals, the relationships built on unhealed wounds crumble. When your soul awakens, the noise of superficiality becomes unbearable. You are not abandoning people. You are outgrowing patterns. You are not disconnecting from the world. You are reconnecting with yourself. This distinction matters deeply because one is rooted in fear and the other in truth. One leads to isolation, while the other leads to alignment. And yet the transition often feels lonely, not because you are alone, but because you are moving into a space that others may not understand. The world around you may respond with confusion, questioning why you no longer show up the way you used to. They may interpret your quietness as distance, your boundaries as coldness, your introspection as withdrawal. But what they cannot see is the internal rebirth taking place. They cannot feel the exhaustion of carrying emotional weights that no longer belong to you. They cannot hear the soft voice inside you urging you toward peace. This disconnect is not rejection, it is release. It is the graceful unfolding of a new chapter, one where your spirit chooses authenticity over attachment and clarity over comfort. When your spirit rises before your surroundings catch up, it creates a tension that is both beautiful and bewildering, a kind of spiritual stretching that you feel in the deepest parts of yourself long before the world around you even begins to notice. This rising is subtle at first, more a shift in awareness than a dramatic change in behavior. You start seeing yourself with clearer, kinder eyes. You begin questioning the ways you've been living, the roles you've been playing, and the expectations you've grown accustomed to carrying. Your soul starts to crave meaning where you once accepted routine. You feel called toward inner truth even while you're still surrounded by old patterns. And because this elevation happens from the inside out, it creates a disconnect between the person you are becoming and the world that still sees you as the person you were. You rise quietly, internally, spiritually, and that quietness can make the transformation feel isolating, even though it is a sign of awakening. As your spirit rises, your tolerance for certain behaviors, conversations, and energies begins to shift. You may not respond with the same enthusiasm to the dramas that once consumed your attention. You might find yourself listening more than speaking, observing more than reacting, and choosing silence where you once felt compelled to explain yourself. This rising brings an unfamiliar kind of peace, one that softens your edges while strengthening your boundaries. You begin to realize that not every argument deserves your truth. Not every invitation deserves your presence, and not every connection deserves your emotional labor. This clarity is not coldness, it is growth. But because the change is internal, people around you might misinterpret it. They may assume you are becoming distant or disengaged when in reality, you are simply becoming more aligned. This inner ascent also brings a heightened awareness of your emotional environment. You begin to feel the weight of things you previously ignored: subtle disrespect, unspoken expectations, unbalanced relationships. Your rising spirit becomes more attuned to authenticity, making it harder for you to accept anything performative or superficial. You start craving conversations that speak to your soul rather than your ego. You feel drawn to people who honor truth, compassion, and depth. And in contrast, the relationships that once felt comfortable suddenly feel too small, as though you can no longer fold yourself into the shapes required to maintain them. This creates a widening gap between your inner and outer worlds, a space where you are learning to honor who you are becoming, even if no one around you recognizes the change. Often, the rising of your spirit reveals the hidden limits of old environments. You may find yourself physically present in familiar spaces while feeling emotionally absent from them. The laughter that once came easily now feels shallow. The routines you once followed now feel constrictive. It is not that these things have become bad. It is that your soul has expanded beyond them. And this expansion can be disorienting because you have not yet stepped into the environments that match your new frequency. You are in the in-between, no longer who you were, but not yet fully living as who you are becoming. This transitional space can be lonely, not because you lack people, but because you lack resonance. Your spirit is vibrating at a higher level than your surroundings, and that difference creates an emotional echo, a longing for alignment you cannot yet fulfill. This rising is not something you choose, it is something that unfolds within you. It is the natural progression of healing, introspection, and self-awareness. As you grow, your spirit sheds what is heavy, what is false, what is outdated. But shedding creates space, and space is often mistaken for emptiness. You may feel lost because the landmarks that once guided you no longer hold meaning. You may feel misunderstood because the people around you still speak the language of your past while you are learning the language of your future. But even in this uncertainty, there is a profound inner knowing, a quiet confidence that you are moving towards something truer, something deeper, something more aligned with your essence. Your spirit rises long before your life rearranges itself to match that rise, and that gap, though uncomfortable, is the birthplace of your becoming. When solitude becomes a teacher instead of a punishment, something profound shifts inside you, something that many people won't understand because they are still running from the very silence you are learning to embrace. Solitude is often feared because it exposes the truths that noise helps us avoid. It strips away distraction and leaves you face to face with your own thoughts, your own wounds, your own longings. In the beginning, the quiet may feel uncomfortable, even heavy, because it reveals parts of you that you've ignored for years. But as you grow, as you awaken, that same quiet begins to feel like a sanctuary, a place where your spirit can stretch, breathe, and speak without interruption. You start to understand that solitude is not the absence of connection, but the presence of deeper clarity. It becomes a space where you rediscover who you are beneath the expectations, demands, and noise of the world. This transformation doesn't happen suddenly. At first, solitude may arrive uninvited, wrapped in loneliness or confusion. You may find yourself withdrawing because you feel misunderstood, or because the connections around you no longer offer the comfort they once did. What used to energize you now drains you. What once made you feel included now makes you feel invisible. When the external world fails to match your internal evolution, solitude becomes the natural refuge, an instinctive retreat into your own company. And though others may see your quiet as withdrawal or detachment, what they cannot see is the inner rearranging taking place. Solitude becomes the room where your spirit begins to stitch together truths you didn't have time or space to notice before. It becomes the mirror where you see not just who you were, but who you are becoming. As solitude deepens, it starts to teach you in ways that people never could. It teaches you to trust your intuition rather than waiting for validation. It teaches you to recognize the difference between loneliness and alignment. You learn that feeling alone does not always mean something is missing. Sometimes it means everything unnecessary has finally fallen away. Solitude helps you hear the quiet voice within you that has been whispering truths beneath the noise of everyone else's opinions. It reveals your patterns, how you've abandoned yourself to make others comfortable, how you've accepted less than you deserved, how you've stayed in rooms where you were not fully seen. In silence, the disguises fall away and you are left with your essence. And although this can be unsettling, it is also liberating. You begin to realize that you are learning yourself in a way that connection never allowed. This inner companionship changes the way you show up in the world. You start to crave authenticity over approval, peace over entertainment, truth over convenience. You become more deliberate with your time, more selective with your energy, more aware of what your spirit can and cannot carry. The solitude that once felt like punishment becomes a sacred ritual, a place to reset, to renew, to return to yourself. You stop seeking people to fill the silence because you realize the silence is where your power is rebuilt. You no longer fear being alone because alone is where you have learned to hear your own voice, your own wisdom, your own calling. And this newfound grounding strengthens you in a way that no external connection ever could. Eventually, solitude reveals a deeper truth. You cannot truly connect with others until you have first connected with yourself. Without this inner dialogue, you approach relationships out of need rather than wholeness, fear rather than clarity, emptiness rather than fullness. But when solitude becomes your teacher, you begin to approach the world from a place of abundance. You learn to give without losing yourself, to love without abandoning your boundaries, to connect without sacrificing your peace. Solitude becomes the anchor that keeps you steady as you navigate the noise of life. It becomes the foundation upon which true, meaningful connection can finally be built. Through solitude, you discover that your own presence is not something to escape, but something to honor. The hidden strength in emotional distance often reveals itself only after you have spent years believing that closeness, constant, unquestioned closeness, was the measure of love, loyalty, and belonging. Emotional distance is misunderstood because people assume it comes from coldness, indifference, or bitterness, when in truth it often emerges from deep self-awareness. It is a quiet boundary that forms when you finally recognize the weight of what you've been carrying and the toll of constantly making yourself available to others while abandoning your own emotional needs. Emotional distance is not the shutting of a door. It is the gentle closing of the gaps where your energy once leaked. It is the moment you realize that your peace matters as much as your empathy, that your heart has limits, and that your spirit cannot thrive in spaces where it is continuously drained. The strength in this distance lies in the clarity it brings, the clarity to see who meets you with sincerity, who meets you with convenience, and who never truly met you at all. As you begin to distance emotionally, you start to understand the patterns that once kept you entangled. You see how often you said yes when you wanted to say no, how often you forgave without healing, how often you remained present in relationships that offered no reciprocity. Emotional distance reveals the parts of you that were performing connection rather than experiencing it. You begin to step back not because you no longer care, but because you care enough about yourself to stop giving to situations that leave you empty. This shift is subtle yet powerful. It teaches you to observe rather than absorb, to witness rather than carry, to understand without overextending. Emotional distance creates space, not a void, but a boundary, where you can listen to your own heartbeat again. You start to value the moments when your mind feels quiet and your spirit feels steady, and you begin to protect that steadiness like something sacred. The strength in this distance also lies in the emotional clarity it grants you. When you are no longer tangled in the expectations and emotions of others, you begin to see relationships with sharper eyes. You notice who respects your boundaries and who only loved you for your compliance. You notice who misses you for your presence and who misses you only for your usefulness. Emotional distance exposes intentions. It reveals the truth behind smiles, the weight behind requests, and the meaning behind silences. This awareness may be painful at first, especially when it reveals imbalances you once tried to ignore. But with this pain comes wisdom, the wisdom to stop confusing attachment with connection, history with harmony, or responsibility with love. Through distance, you finally see what your closeness prevented you from recognizing. There is also a powerful strength in recognizing your emotional limits. When you allow yourself to step back, you learn that it is not your duty to fix every conflict, soothe every wound, or carry the burdens others are unwilling to address themselves. Emotional distance teaches you to let people handle their own lessons, even when you care about them deeply. It teaches you the difference between support and self-sacrifice. You begin to understand that protecting your peace does not make you selfish. It makes you whole. And when you are whole, you can love with more depth, give with more sincerity, and show up with more authenticity because you are no longer operating from exhaustion or obligation. Ultimately, emotional distance becomes a form of emotional intelligence. It teaches you to respond rather than react, to pause rather than push, to choose presence rather than force connection. It transforms your relationships because it transforms the way you show up in them. You start engaging from a place of strength rather than depletion, from intention rather than impulse. The world may not understand your need for distance, but your soul understands it deeply. It knows that stepping back is sometimes the only way to step into your true self. Emotional distance is not the weakening of connection. It is the refinement of it. It is the quiet power of honoring your inner world so that when you do choose to connect, you bring not just your presence, but your truth. Rebuilding your world from a place of clarity, truth, and power is not a sudden reconstruction. It is a slow, intentional process where you begin to reclaim pieces of yourself that you once scattered across people, places, and situations that were never meant to hold them. When you reach this stage of awakening, you no longer rebuild your life based on who you were told to be, who you tried to be, or who others expected you to be. Instead, you begin shaping your world according to who you truly are. This rebuilding begins quietly, often rising from a moment of deep exhaustion, the kind that settles into your bones and whispers that you cannot continue living a life misaligned with your spirit. From this exhaustion, clarity emerges, not in the form of loud epiphanies, but through subtle recognitions. You start noticing what feels heavy versus what feels true, what drains you versus what nourishes you, what keeps you small versus what helps you rise. And with each recognition, a new foundation begins to form. As this clarity deepens, you start dismantling the structures built on fear, obligation, and old wounds. The relationships you maintained out of guilt or habit begin to feel like fragile scaffolding that no longer supports your becoming. The responsibilities you carried to satisfy others begin to feel irrelevant when weighed against your own emotional well-being. You begin honoring your truth even when it disrupts routines that once felt familiar. Rebuilding your world from this place means letting go, not with resentment, but with understanding. You release people with whom you no longer share alignment, recognizing that not all departures are betrayals. Some are redirections. You let go of roles that you played to be accepted, realizing that acceptance achieved through performance is not acceptance at all. This letting go is not destruction, it is refinement. It clears the ground so your spirit can finally plant something real. This rebuilding process also reshapes the way you view connection, purpose, and belonging. You no longer rush into relationships hoping to be understood. Instead, you wait for connections where your truth does not need translation. You no longer seek external approval because the clarity within you has become a stronger guide than the opinions around you. You start valuing environments where your presence is not merely tolerated, but welcomed, where your growth is not resented, but supported, where your voice is not silenced, but heard. This shift changes the way you walk through life. You become more selective, not out of superiority, but out of self-respect. You begin making choices based on alignment rather than fear, on intuition rather than pressure, on authenticity rather than convenience. In rebuilding your world, power becomes something quiet and deeply rooted. It is not loud or forceful. It is the confidence that comes from knowing yourself. It is the strength to say no without guilt, to walk away without anger, to choose differently without apology. This power reminds you that you do not need to cling to what is shrinking you or chase what is rejecting you. True power is the realization that your peace is not negotiable. It is the understanding that you are not obligated to carry what hurts you, nor are you required to shrink for anyone's comfort. You begin to move through life with a grounded certainty, knowing that what is meant for you will never require you to betray yourself to receive it. As you continue rebuilding, you start embracing joy, softness, and hope in ways you never could when you were living from a place of confusion or emotional depletion. You find beauty in small moments, strength in vulnerability, and freedom in boundaries. You learn to create a world that reflects your values rather than your fears, your dreams rather than your past, your truth rather than your survival patterns. And piece by piece, your life becomes a mirror of your healed self. Steady, aligned, purposeful. Rebuilding from clarity, truth, and power means stepping into a life that finally feels like it belongs to you, one where connection is authentic, peace is protected, and your spirit is free to rise without restraint.